The crimson roses of Willowbrook Plantation bloomed throughout Virginia's harshest winters, defying every known law of nature and botany. For 3 consecutive years, from 1847 to 1850, these impossible flowers drew visitors from as far as Richmond and Charleston, all of whom marveled at their unnatural beauty and intoxicating fragrance. What those admirers never discovered was the horrifying truth buried beneath the fertile soil, a truth that would claim the lives of 11 young women and drive one grieving widow to the very depths of madness. Carefully hidden away in the basement archives of the Henrico County Courthouse, local records tell a story so disturbing that for over 170 years, no historian has dared to piece together the complete picture. Until now. The plantation ledgers, servant registries, and medical reports reveal a pattern so chilling, so methodically executed, that it challenges everything we thought we knew about grief, obsession, and the lengths to which a broken mind will go to preserve what it cannot bear to lose. Before we continue with the story of Evangeline Crowe and her Garden of Horrors, I need you to do something for me. If you're ready to hear a tale that will forever change how you look at every rose garden, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. The support from viewers like you allows us to uncover these forgotten nightmares and bring them into the light. But nothing could have prepared the people of Henrico County for what Mrs. Crowe would do in the name of love, loss, and the desperate preservation of memory. Willowbrook Plantation sprawled across 800 acres of Virginia's most fertile tobacco land, its main house standing like a white columned monument to Southern prosperity. Built in 1798 by tobacco baron Jeremiah Crowe, the estate had weathered wars, economic downturns, and social upheavals while maintaining its reputation as one of the finest plantations in Henrico County. By 1847, however, time and tragedy had begun to cast long shadows across its manicured grounds. Evangeline Fairfax had married into the Crowe family at 19, bringing with her not only a substantial dowry but also an almost supernatural gift for horticulture. Born to a prominent Richmond family, she possessed the refined education expected of a Southern belle, yet her true passion lay in the soil and seeds, in the delicate alchemy of coaxing life from the earth. Her garden quickly became legendary throughout Virginia society, roses that bloomed larger and more fragrant than any seen before, vegetables that grew with impossible abundance, and flowering trees that seemed to defy the very seasons themselves. The slaves and hired servants of Willowbrook often whispered among themselves about Mrs. Crowe's peculiar habits. She would spend hours alone in her garden before dawn, talking softly to her plants as if they were beloved children. Martha Henley, the head housekeeper, once confided to her sister that she had seen the mistress weeping over wilted flowers as if they were family members on their deathbeds. But these eccentricities seemed harmless enough, even endearing, in a woman whose gentle nature and generous treatment of the household staff had earned her genuine affection from all who served the plantation. Everything changed on the bitter February morning of 1847, when Jeremiah Crowe suffered a massive heart attack while inspecting his tobacco stores. He was found by 2 field hands, clutched against a bale of his finest leaf, his face frozen in an expression of surprise and pain. The funeral drew mourners from across 3 counties, all coming to pay their respects to a man who had been both a shrewd businessman and a fair employer in an era when such fairness was rare. Evangeline's grief was immediate and absolute. Those who attended the funeral would later recall how she remained seated beside the open grave long after the other mourners had departed, her gloved hands methodically shredding rose petals from her wedding bouquet onto the dark earth. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the family physician, noted in his private journal that Mrs. Crowe seemed to retreat entirely into herself in the weeks following the burial, speaking only when directly addressed and then only in whispers. It was during this period of mourning that Evangeline began to exhibit the first signs of what Dr. Hartwell would later describe as an unnatural fixation upon the preservation of beauty in the face of inevitable decay. She dismissed most of the plantation's field workers, claiming financial necessity, but retained a full complement of house servants, young women primarily, all between the ages of 16 and 25. She also began to expand her garden with an almost manic energy, ordering rare seeds and exotic soil amendments from as far away as Charleston and Savannah. The transformation of both woman and garden would begin slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the first subtle signs of madness that creep into a mind already fractured by loss. But by the autumn of 1847, those who knew Evangeline best could see that something fundamental had shifted. Her grief had curdled into something darker, something that would soon demand a terrible price from those unfortunate enough to be caught in its shadow. Martha Henley would later tell investigators that she first noticed the change in her mistress during the October rose pruning. Instead of the gentle care Evangeline had always shown her plants, she attacked the bushes with an almost violent intensity, cutting away not just dead growth but healthy branches as well. When Martha suggested that such severe pruning might damage the plants, Evangeline turned to her with eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. "Death feeds life, Martha," she had whispered, her voice carrying a certainty that chilled the older woman to the bone. "Everything beautiful requires sacrifice." The first death came with the November frost of 1847, when 17-year-old Sarah Caldwell collapsed while tending to Mrs. Crowe's expanding rose garden. Sarah, a cheerful Irish girl whose family had fled the potato famine just 2 years prior, had been working in the garden since before sunrise, preparing the delicate hybrid roses for the coming winter. According to the other servants, she'd been assigned increasingly demanding tasks in recent weeks, hauling water from the distant well, mixing heavy soil amendments, and working long into the evening hours by lamplight. Dr. Hartwell was summoned immediately, but by the time he arrived, Sarah was beyond help. His examination revealed extreme exhaustion, severe malnutrition, and what he described in his notes as a constitution completely depleted by excessive physical demand. Most disturbing of all, Sarah's hands were stained a deep crimson, not from blood, as was first assumed, but from some unknown substance that Dr. Hartwell could not identify despite his medical training. Evangeline's reaction to Sarah's death was unlike anything the household staff had ever witnessed. Rather than the grief or shock one might expect, she displayed an almost scientific curiosity about the girl's final moments. She questioned each servant extensively about Sarah's last words, her final expressions, even the exact position in which her body was found. When Martha Henley suggested calling the sheriff, Evangeline's demeanor shifted to one of cold authority. "Sarah died serving this household faithfully," she declared, her voice carrying the imperious tone of Southern aristocracy. "She will be buried with honor on Crow land, and we will speak no more of calling outsiders to intrude upon our private grief." The burial took place 3 days later in the small family cemetery behind the main house. But what disturbed the servants most was not the ceremony itself, but what happened afterward. That very evening, under cover of darkness, Evangeline was seen digging up the rich, dark soil from around Sarah's grave and carefully transporting it to her rose garden. When Martha Henley confronted her the next morning, Evangeline offered an explanation that would chill the housekeeper for years to come: "The soil where Sarah rests has been blessed by her devotion. Her essence, her very life force, will help my garden flourish as she never could in life. It is the most beautiful tribute I can offer her memory." But Dr. Hartwell's private notes, discovered decades later in his estate papers, tell a more disturbing story. His medical examination of Sarah had revealed evidence of what he called systematic physical depletion signs that suggested the girl had been deliberately overworked and undernourished over a period of several weeks. More troubling still were his observations of Mrs. Crowe during Sarah's final hours, noting her unseemly interest in the physiological processes of dying and her insistence on measuring and recording details that no grieving employer should have cared to document. The doctor's suspicions were further aroused when he attempted to examine some of the crimson substance that had stained Sarah's hands. When he requested a sample for analysis, Evangeline became agitated to the point of near violence, insisting that Sarah's essence must not be disturbed or removed from the plantation grounds. She claimed that the substance was merely a special fertilizer she had developed, but her refusal to allow scientific examination struck the doctor as highly unusual. In the weeks following Sarah's death, the roses began to show remarkable improvement. Despite the approaching winter, they continued to bloom with an intensity and fragrance that defied all botanical logic. Visitors to the plantation marveled at the impossible beauty of the flowers, never knowing that beneath their feet lay the mortal remains of a young Irish girl whose life had been systematically consumed to feed their splendor. But Evangeline's hunger for what she had begun to call life essence was far from satisfied. Sarah Caldwell's death had merely shown her the way forward, had revealed the terrible secret that would drive her to commit acts of increasing cruelty and calculation. The roses, more beautiful than ever in their impossible winter bloom, seemed to whisper to her in the pre-dawn hours, demanding more sacrifice, more devotion, more life to sustain their unnatural perfection. The pattern had been established. The method had been proven. And 11 young women would pay the ultimate price for Evangeline Crowe's descent into madness. The harsh winter of 1847 should have brought dormancy to every garden in Virginia. But Evangeline's roses continued to thrive with an almost supernatural vigor. Word spread quickly through Richmond society about the miraculous flowers blooming at Willowbrook, and despite the plantation's remote location, visitors arrived almost daily to witness what local newspapers began calling * the botanical wonder of Henrico County Star. These visitors saw only beauty, massive blooms in shades of red so deep they appeared almost black in certain light, petals with a silk-like texture that seemed to glow from within, and a fragrance so intoxicating that several ladies were observed to grow faint from its intensity. What they could not see was the methodical transformation taking place within the plantation house, where Evangeline had begun to study her remaining servants with the calculating gaze of a scientist examining laboratory specimens. Martha Henley, now the sole authority figure among the household staff, watched with growing alarm as her mistress implemented what she called * new efficiency measures * for the domestic workers. These measures began innocuously enough: longer working hours, reduced meal portions to prevent sluggishness, and the introduction of what Evangeline termed * vital essence work * in the garden during the coldest pre-dawn hours. The vital essence work proved to be the most disturbing development. Each servant was required to spend at least 3 hours before sunrise working directly with the soil around the rose bushes, mixing in substances that Evangeline claimed were scientifically formulated to enhance plant vitality. The work was back-breaking, hauling heavy buckets of this mysterious mixture from the basement of the main house, spreading it carefully around each bush, then working it deep into the frozen earth with their bare hands. During these sessions, Evangeline would pace among the workers, carrying a leather-bound journal and taking detailed notes about each girl's physical condition. She recorded their breathing patterns, the color of their complexion, the steadiness of their hands, and most unnervingly, what she described as their * vital emanation star. Any servant who showed signs of fatigue was singled out for additional duties, as if exhaustion itself had become a valuable commodity. The second death came in late January of 1848, when 19-year-old Rebecca Marsh collapsed during one of these pre-dawn sessions. Rebecca, a local Virginia girl whose father had died fighting in the Mexican War, had been supporting her widowed mother and 3 younger siblings with her wages from Willowbrook. Martha Henley later testified that Rebecca had been growing visibly weaker for weeks, but whenever she attempted to intercede on the girl's behalf, Evangeline would respond with scientific-sounding explanations about * building constitutional strength through graduated physical challenges *. Dr. Hartwell's examination of Rebecca revealed the same mysterious crimson staining on her hands and clothes, along with what he privately documented as * extreme constitutional depletion consistent with systematic overwork and nutritional deficiency *. More disturbing were his observations of Evangeline during Rebecca's final hours. She insisted on being present during the medical examination, he wrote in his private journal, taking detailed notes about the dying girl's vital signs and asking increasingly specific questions about the physical processes of death. Mrs. Crowe displayed an unseemly fascination with the mechanics of mortality. Her questions were not those of a concerned employer, but rather those of someone studying death as one might study any other natural phenomenon. When I suggested calling for a minister to comfort the dying girl, she actually objected, claiming that external influences might * contaminate * her observations. Rebecca's burial followed the same pattern as Sarah's, with Evangeline conducting a midnight soil-gathering expedition that left the servants too terrified to speak of what they had witnessed. But this time, Martha Henley made a discovery that would haunt her for the rest of her life. While cleaning Rebecca's quarters, she found a hidden diary in which the girl had documented her final weeks at Willowbrook. The diary entries revealed the true horror of Evangeline's efficiency measures. Rebecca described being forced to mix fertilizer with her bare hands despite painful chemical burns, being denied adequate food while being required to perform increasingly strenuous labor, and most disturbing of all, being subjected to what Evangeline called * vitality assessments *. Physical examinations conducted in the basement of the main house where the mistress would measure everything from pulse rate to skin temperature while recording the data in her mysterious journals. * She watches us like we ain't people anymore. Rebecca had written in her final entry, her handwriting barely legible from exhaustion. Like we're nothing but things to be used up for them roses. I seen how she looks at us when we're working, like she's calculating something terrible. God help us all. I think she's gone completely mad. And ain't none of us going to survive whatever she's planning. But perhaps the most chilling discovery in Rebecca's diary was her description of the basement where these vitality assessments took place. According to her account, Evangeline had transformed the space into something resembling a medical laboratory, complete with scales for weighing, instruments for measuring, and rows of glass bottles filled with various substances in shades ranging from pale amber to deep crimson. She's got charts on the walls, Rebecca had written, showing pictures of people and plants, all connected with lines and arrows. And there's bottles everywhere, all labeled with girls' names and dates. I seen bottles with Sarah's name and others with names I don't recognize. How many girls has she done this to? And what's she planning to do with all them bottles? Martha Henley burned Rebecca's diary that very night, but not before copying several key passages into her own record-keeping. She had begun to understand that she was witnessing something far more sinister than mere workplace negligence. Evangeline Crowe was conducting some sort of systematic experiment on her household staff, and 2 young women had already paid for it with their lives. But confronting the mistress directly was impossible. Evangeline controlled not only the servants' wages, but also their housing, their food, and their references for future employment. In the isolated social structure of plantation life, she wielded absolute authority over those in her care. Martha realized with growing horror that she and the remaining servants were trapped in a nightmare of one woman's making, with no clear path to escape or salvation. As winter gave way to spring, the roses bloomed with even greater magnificence, their impossible beauty drawing visitors from across the south. But Martha Henley knew the terrible price being paid for that beauty, and she began to pray that someone, somehow, would discover the truth before Evangeline's hunger claimed any more young lives. Spring arrived early at Willowbrook Plantation in 1848, and with it came new horrors disguised as horticultural innovation. Evangeline's rose garden had expanded to cover nearly 2 acres, with pathways winding between beds of increasingly exotic varieties. She had begun corresponding with botanists from as far away as England and France, sharing detailed observations about her cultivation methods while carefully omitting the most crucial elements of her success. The servants who remained, now reduced to just 7 young women, noticed that their mistress had begun to organize them according to what she called constitutional categories . Using her leather-bound journals filled with measurements and observations, she had divided them into groups based on factors that seemed to have little connection to their actual job duties. Some girls were assigned to morning vitality work others to afternoon essence cultivation and a select few to what she termed intensive preparation duties . 20-year-old Catherine Walsh found herself assigned to the intensive preparation category, a designation that filled her with dread from the very first day. Catherine, whose family had immigrated from County Cork just 5 years earlier, possessed a quick intelligence that had not gone unnoticed by her mistress. Unlike some of the other servants, she had learned to read and write, skills that Evangeline seemed to find particularly valuable, for reasons that remained ominously unclear. The intensive preparation duties began each morning at 4, when Catherine was required to report to the basement laboratory that Evangeline had established beneath the main house. The space had been transformed into something that bore disturbing resemblances to both a medical facility and an alchemist's workshop. Tables lined with scientific instruments occupied the center of the room, while the walls were covered with detailed charts showing anatomical drawings, botanical illustrations, and what appeared to be complex formulas written in Evangeline's precise handwriting. "Catherine, my dear," Evangeline would say each morning, her voice carrying a motherly warmth that somehow made her words even more unsettling, "your role in our great work is absolutely vital. You must understand that what we are accomplishing here represents a revolution in agricultural science. Future generations will marvel at our achievements." The work itself seemed designed to systematically drain Catherine's physical strength while simultaneously subjecting her to increasingly invasive monitoring. She was required to lift and carry heavy containers of the mysterious fertilizer mixture, work for hours in cramped positions tending to individual plants, and submit to daily health assessments during which Evangeline would measure her pulse, temperature, and breathing rate while recording the data in ever-growing files. But it was the conversations during these sessions that truly revealed the depth of Evangeline's madness. She would speak at length about theories she had developed regarding what she called life transference the idea that the vital essence of one living being could be extracted and used to enhance the vitality of another. She cited medical texts from the previous century, misinterpreting complex theories about blood circulation and nervous system function to support her increasingly deranged hypothesis. The ancient physicians understood something that modern medicine has forgotten, she would explain while adjusting the mysterious apparatus she had constructed for her measurements. They recognized that life itself is a substance that can be harvested, concentrated, and redistributed. My roses have shown me the truth of this principle. Each bloom represents not merely plant growth, but the successful transfer of human vitality into botanical form. Dr. Hartwell, meanwhile, had begun his own investigation into the unusual number of deaths among the Willowbrook household staff. His medical training and scientific approach to problems had led him to recognize patterns that others might dismiss as coincidence. The similarities in symptoms, the timing of the deaths, and most significantly, the mysterious crimson substance found on each victim's hand suggested something far more sinister than workplace accidents. His inquiries, however, were met with increasingly sophisticated resistance from Evangeline. She had prepared detailed explanations for every aspect of her garden work, citing scientific journals and agricultural publications to support her methods. When he questioned the health of her remaining servants, she produced carefully fabricated medical records showing regular checkups and excellent care. She had even begun to cultivate relationships with influential members of Richmond society, using her garden's reputation to build a network of supporters who would vouch for her character and competence. Just when it seemed that Dr. Hartwell's suspicions might be dismissed as professional jealousy, he made a discovery that changed everything. While researching historical agricultural methods in the Virginia Historical Society's archives, he uncovered a collection of documents from the early 1700s describing accusations of witchcraft brought against a woman named Mercy Fairfax, Evangeline's great-grandmother. The accusations, while ultimately dismissed by colonial authorities, contained disturbing parallels to the current situation at Willowbrook. Mercy Fairfax had been accused by her neighbors of using unnatural methods to maintain a garden of impossible beauty, methods that allegedly involved the mysterious deaths of several young women in her employ. The charges were dropped when influential members of the Fairfax family intervened, but the court records included testimony describing practices that seemed eerily similar to what Dr. Hartwell suspected was happening at the plantation. The accused did maintain a garden of surpassing beauty, one witness had testified, but this beauty came at a cost most terrible. Young maids in her service would sicken and die with alarming frequency, always after spending long hours laboring in her cursed soil. And always after each death, her flowers would bloom with greater magnificence than before. Armed with this historical evidence, Dr. Hartwell began to document his observations more systematically. He started making unannounced visits to Willowbrook, carefully noting the physical condition of the remaining servants and attempting to gather samples of the mysterious substances Evangeline used in her garden work. But each visit only deepened his conviction that he was witnessing something unprecedented in its calculated cruelty. The roses, now entering their most spectacular blooming period, seemed to mock his efforts to expose the truth. Visitors continued to arrive daily, their praise for Evangeline's horticultural genius growing more extravagant with each passing week. Local newspapers had begun to feature regular articles about the miracle garden of Henrico County, with some writers suggesting that Evangeline's methods represented a breakthrough that could revolutionize American agriculture. But Catherine Walsh knew better. In the pre-dawn hours of the basement laboratory, watching her mistress's eyes gleam with fanatic intensity as she recorded each measurement and observation, Catherine understood that she was not witnessing agricultural innovation, but rather the systematic implementation of madness. And as her own strength began to ebb under the relentless demands of intensive preparation duties, she realized with growing terror that she was likely to become the next sacrifice to Evangeline's impossible roses. The summer of 1848 brought with it a heat so oppressive that even the hardiest Virginia tobacco began to wilt. Yet Evangeline's roses continued to flourish with an intensity that defied every principle of botany. The garden had become a pilgrimage site for horticulturists from across the eastern seaboard, with visitors arriving daily to witness what the Richmond Inquirer had dubbed the eighth wonder of the agricultural world star. But beneath this facade of horticultural triumph, a more sinister rhythm had established itself at Willowbrook Plantation. Catherine Walsh noticed that her fellow servants had begun to disappear with alarming regularity, not all at once, but gradually, systematically, as if according to some predetermined schedule that only Evangeline understood. In June, it had been Anna Kowalski, a Polish immigrant whose family had settled in Richmond after fleeing political upheaval in their homeland. Anna had been assigned to what Evangeline called deep cultivation duties, spending 12-hour days working the soil around the oldest rose bushes with her bare hands. Her death came after 3 weeks of this intensive labor, her body found collapsed among the very flowers she had attended with such desperate dedication. July claimed Mary O'Brien, a red-haired Irish girl whose laugh had once brightened the servants' quarters during their brief moments of rest. Mary's assignment to the essence extraction detail had involved working with increasingly concentrated versions of the mysterious fertilizer mixture, her hands and arms becoming progressively more stained with the crimson substance that seemed to seep into her very skin. Dr. Hartwell's examination revealed chemical burns so severe that he privately wondered how she had survived as long as she did. By August, only 4 servants remained, and Catherine had begun to understand the terrible logic behind Evangeline's selection process. Each death had been carefully orchestrated to occur during the peak blooming period of different rose varieties, as if her mistress was conducting some sort of grotesque agricultural experiment using human lives as variables in her calculations. The breakthrough in understanding came when Catherine discovered Evangeline's private study, a room in the plantation house that had previously been locked to all servants. During one of her intensive preparation sessions, she had been sent to retrieve additional measuring instruments from what Evangeline described as her research archive star. The room she entered was a shrine to madness disguised as scientific inquiry. The walls were covered with detailed charts showing the correlation between servant deaths and garden productivity. Each death was marked with precise dates, physical measurements of the deceased, and corresponding data about rose bloom size, color intensity, and fragrance strength. But most horrifying of all were the detailed anatomical drawings that Evangeline had created, showing what she believed to be the pathways through which life essence traveled from human beings into plant matter. A large table in the center of the room held dozens of glass bottles, each carefully labeled with a servant's name and containing various amounts of the crimson substance. Catherine recognized names from years past, girls she had assumed had simply left for other employment, but whose essence apparently remained captured in Evangeline's macabre collection. Some bottles were nearly empty, their contents presumably having been used to nourish specific plants, while others contained enough of the mysterious fluid to suggest that their donors had suffered prolonged extraction processes. But it was the discovery of Evangeline's personal journal that revealed the full scope of her madness. Written in her precise, educated handwriting, it detailed not just her methods, but also her philosophical justification for what she was doing. She had convinced herself that she was conducting legitimate scientific research, that her work represented a breakthrough in understanding the fundamental nature of life itself. The ignorant masses see only death where I see transformation. One entry read. Each of these simple creatures achieves in death an ability that was impossible during their mundane lives. Their essence, properly harvested and applied, creates beauty that will endure long after their individual suffering has been forgotten. I am not a murderess but an artist, working with the most precious medium of all, life itself. The journal also revealed that Evangeline's madness had a specific timeline and goal. She was working toward what she called the Great Blooming a moment when her garden would achieve such perfection that it would attract international attention and establish her as the greatest botanical innovator in history. This achievement would require, according to her calculations, the life essence of at least 15 young women, applied according to precise timing that corresponded to lunar cycles and seasonal changes. Catherine realized with mounting horror that she had stumbled upon a countdown to murder. Evangeline had already claimed 11 victims, and according to her journal, the remaining 4 servants were scheduled to contribute their essence according to a timeline that would culminate in the spring of 1849. Catherine's own name appeared at the very end of the list, marked for what Evangeline described as *the final essence extraction to achieve maximum garden perfection*. Just when Catherine thought she understood the full scope of her mistress's plans, she made an even more disturbing discovery. Hidden beneath the main work table was a collection of correspondence between Evangeline and various scientific institutions across America and Europe. She had been sharing her research findings with legitimate botanists and medical researchers, carefully omitting the source of her data while presenting herself as a pioneering scientist who had discovered revolutionary methods for enhancing plant growth. Several prominent institutions had expressed interest in publishing her work, and one prestigious botanical society in London had actually invited her to present her findings at their annual conference. Evangeline was not just killing her servants to feed her obsession, she was building a scientific reputation based on their deaths, transforming their sacrifice into academic glory and social recognition. The correspondence also revealed that Dr. Hartwell's suspicions had not gone unnoticed. Evangeline had been carefully monitoring his activities, even going so far as to establish relationships with other physicians in the area who might be called upon to provide second opinions about any unusual deaths at Willowbrook. She had created an entire network of professional support designed to deflect any serious investigation into her activities. But perhaps most chilling of all was a letter from a botanist at Harvard University expressing fascination with her methods and requesting more detailed information about what he called her revolutionary approach to life force cultivation. The letter suggested that Evangeline's madness was not just being tolerated by the scientific community, it was being actively encouraged by researchers who saw her work as a potential breakthrough in agricultural science. As Catherine carefully returned the documents to their original positions, she realized that exposing Evangeline's crimes would be far more difficult than simply alerting the authorities. Her mistress had spent years building credibility and support within the very institutions that should have been investigating her activities. She had transformed her madness into a form of scientific respectability that would be almost impossible to challenge without concrete evidence that Catherine had no way to obtain safely. Time was running short. According to Evangeline's journal, the next phase of her plan was scheduled to begin with the autumn harvest, and Catherine's name was among those marked for immediate attention. She had perhaps weeks, maybe days, before her own life essence would be added to the collection of bottles in Evangeline's macabre laboratory. The roses continued to bloom with impossible beauty, their crimson petals seeming to glow with an inner light that visitors found mesmerizing. But Catherine now understood that each perfect bloom represented the life force of a young woman whose only crime had been seeking honest employment at what should have been a respectable southern plantation. The garden was not a wonder of nature but a graveyard disguised as paradise, and she was running out of time to prevent it from claiming its final victims. The autumn of 1849 arrived with an unusual chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of everyone at Willowbrook Plantation. Evangeline's garden, defying every natural law, continued to produce roses of such extraordinary beauty that delegations of botanists had begun arriving from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia. But Catherine Walsh, now the sole surviving member of the original household staff, understood that this magnificence masked the most calculated series of murders in Virginia's history. Over the past 18 months, she had watched as Evangeline systematically eliminated her fellow servants, each death timed to coincide with specific phases of her horticultural calendar. The pretense of natural causes had become increasingly difficult to maintain, forcing Evangeline to rely more heavily on her network of corrupted medical professionals and intimidated local officials. Dr. Hartwell's persistent investigations had been neutralized through a campaign of professional discreditation orchestrated by Evangeline's allies in the Richmond medical community. Catherine's own survival had depended on her ability to make herself indispensable to Evangeline's research while secretly documenting evidence of the crimes being committed. She had learned to anticipate her mistress's moods, to provide the detailed observations and measurements that fed her scientific delusions, and most crucially, to appear physically robust enough to be worth preserving until the final phase of the Great Blooming Star. But on the morning of October 13, Catherine discovered that her time had run out. Hidden among the usual research materials in Evangeline's study was a detailed schedule for what she called the final essence extraction protocol. Catherine's name topped the list, followed by specific instructions for harvesting what Evangeline described as maximum vital fluid concentration from the primary subject's star. The protocol was horrifyingly methodical. Catherine was to be subjected to 3 weeks of intensive preparation involving controlled starvation, systematic physical exhaustion, and daily extraction procedures designed to concentrate her life essence while keeping her alive long enough to achieve what Evangeline called optimal essence density star. The process would culminate on November 3 during what astronomical charts indicated would be a rare lunar eclipse, a celestial event that Evangeline believed would enhance the spiritual transfer of life force from human to plant. Reading these details by lamplight in the pre-dawn hours, Catherine finally understood the full scope of Evangeline's madness. This was not simply the work of a grief-stricken woman who had lost her ability to distinguish right from wrong. This was the systematic implementation of a completely fabricated scientific theory, executed with the precision of someone who genuinely believed she was conducting legitimate research that would revolutionize human understanding of life itself. The realization that escape was impossible came with the discovery that Evangeline had been monitoring her movements for weeks. Hidden throughout the plantation house were observation points from which her mistress could watch every corridor, every room, every potential exit route. More disturbing still were the detailed notes Evangeline had been keeping about Catherine's behavior, notes that revealed an almost supernatural ability to predict her thoughts and anticipate her actions. Subject demonstrates increasing awareness of research parameters. One recent entry read. Elevated stress responses suggest optimal psychological preparation for final extraction phase. Physical constitution remains robust despite controlled nutritional restrictions. Recommend immediate implementation of intensive preparation protocol to prevent potential resistance behaviors. But Catherine's desperation gave birth to a plan born of equal parts courage and calculation. If she could not escape Evangeline's immediate control, she could at least ensure that the truth about Willowbrook's horrors would not die with her. Using skills acquired during her months of assisting with Evangeline's record-keeping, she began to compile a comprehensive account of everything she had witnessed, hidden in places where it might eventually be discovered by investigators. More importantly, she had identified a potential ally in Thomas Hartwell, Dr. Hartwell's eldest son, who had recently returned from medical studies in Philadelphia. Thomas had begun making regular visits to Willowbrook under the pretense of courting one of the neighboring plantation daughters, but Catherine suspected that his real purpose was to investigate the circumstances surrounding his father's professional disgrace. The confrontation came sooner than Catherine had anticipated. On the evening of October 20th, while preparing for what she hoped would be her final night of intensive preparation duties, she discovered that Evangeline had been reading her hidden documents. The evidence was undeniable, pages had been moved, ink smears indicated recent handling, and most damning of all, Evangeline's latest journal entries contained direct responses to observations Catherine had thought were safely concealed. "My dear Catherine," Evangeline's voice carried the same maternal warmth that had always made her words more terrifying than any shouted threat. "Did you really believe that I was unaware of your little literary project? I have been monitoring your activities since the day you first entered my employ. Every thought you believed was private, every plan you imagined was secret, every hope you harbored for escape, all of it has been part of my research from the very beginning." The basement laboratory had been transformed for what Evangeline clearly intended to be their final encounter. The collection of bottles containing the essence of previous victims had been arranged in precise patterns around a central table equipped with restraints and extraction apparatus that represented months of careful preparation. Charts showing Catherine's physical measurements over the past year covered every wall, creating a shrine to systematic murder disguised as scientific research. "You have served your purpose magnificently," Evangeline continued, her eyes gleaming with the fanatic intensity that Catherine had learned to recognize as the most dangerous sign of her mistress's mental state. "Your intelligence, your resilience, your capacity for observation, all of these qualities have made you the perfect subject for my most important work. The essence extraction from someone of your caliber will provide the final component needed to achieve perfect botanical immortality." But Catherine had not spent 18 months documenting Evangeline's methods without learning something about psychological manipulation herself. Instead of displaying the fear that her mistress clearly expected, she adopted the same clinical tone that Evangeline used when discussing her research. "Your methodology is fundamentally flawed," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "You've been so focused on extraction procedures that you've ignored the most basic principles of scientific validation. How can you claim success when you have no control group, no peer review, and no reproducible results?" The effect of this challenge was immediate and devastating. Evangeline's carefully maintained facade of scientific rationality cracked, revealing the raw madness beneath. For the first time since Catherine had known her, the woman who had murdered 11 innocent girls lost complete control of her emotions. "You ignorant creature," she screamed, her voice echoing off the basement walls with an intensity that suggested years of suppressed rage. "You dare to question methods that have taken me 5 years to perfect. You think your peasant Irish mind can comprehend research that will revolutionize human understanding of life itself?" It was in this moment of unguarded fury that Catherine saw her only chance for survival. Evangeline's scientific pretensions were not just a disguise for her madness, they were the foundation upon which her entire identity had been constructed. Challenge that foundation, and the whole elaborate structure of her delusions began to collapse. "Look around you," Catherine pressed, gesturing toward the bottles and charts that filled the laboratory. "You call this science, but it's nothing more than the ravings of a grief-stricken woman who couldn't accept her husband's death. You've murdered 11 innocent girls, not for research, but because you're too weak to face reality." The physical violence that followed was swift and brutal, but it was also exactly what Catherine had been hoping to provoke. Evangeline's attack was not the calculated action of someone implementing a careful plan, but the desperate flailing of someone whose fundamental self-concept had been destroyed. In her rage, she forgot about the extraction apparatus, the careful timing, the lunar eclipse, everything that had been central to her delusional great blooming protocol. The struggle that ensued was brief but decisive. Evangeline's years of comfortable plantation life had not prepared her for physical combat with someone who had spent months building strength through forced labor. When Catherine managed to break free from her mistress's initial assault, she found herself in possession of one of the sharp instruments that Evangeline had prepared for the extraction procedure. What happened next would haunt Catherine for the rest of her life, but it was also the moment that saved not only her own existence, but potentially the lives of countless other young women who might have fallen victim to Evangeline's expanding madness. The confrontation ended with Evangeline Crowe's death, not from the elaborate scientific procedure she had planned for others, but from a simple, desperate act of self-defense by the young woman she had intended to murder. Just when Catherine thought she had witnessed the worst horrors that Willowbrook Plantation could reveal, she made one final discovery that changed everything she thought she understood about Evangeline's crimes. Hidden beneath the main workbench was a collection of correspondence that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy she had uncovered. Evangeline had not been working alone. Her letters revealed an extensive network of botanists, medical researchers, and wealthy plantation owners across the South who had been collaborating on what they called agricultural optimization through biological resource management In plainer terms, they had been sharing methods for using human lives to enhance crop production, disguising systematic murder as scientific innovation. The network included prominent names from Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia, respected members of society who had been implementing versions of Evangeline's methods on their own properties. Worse still, the correspondence indicated that Evangeline's work was considered preliminary research for a much larger project that would have involved the systematic exploitation of enslaved populations across the entire region. Thomas Hartwell arrived at Willowbrook 3 hours later, drawn by screams that had carried across the plantation grounds during Catherine's struggle with her mistress. What he found in the basement laboratory provided more than enough evidence to vindicate his father's suspicions and exposed the full scope of the horrors that had been committed under the guise of agricultural research. But the revelation of the wider conspiracy meant that simply exposing Evangeline's crimes would not be sufficient to prevent future atrocities. The network she had been part of included individuals with enough wealth and influence to suppress any investigation that threatened their interests. Catherine realized that her survival had given her not just freedom, but also the terrible responsibility of ensuring that the truth about Willowbrook would not be buried along with its victims. The aftermath of that October night in 1849 would reverberate through Virginia society for decades, though the full truth would remain hidden from public view for nearly a century. Thomas Hartwell's investigation revealed evidence of crimes so systematic and extensive that local authorities found themselves confronting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of southern agricultural and medical establishments. Catherine Walsh's testimony, supported by the comprehensive documentation she had secretly compiled, provided investigators with a detailed account of how Evangeline Crowe had transformed grief into madness and madness into a murderous scientific delusion. But perhaps more importantly, her discovery of the correspondence network revealed that Willowbrook's horrors were part of a larger pattern of exploitation that had been spreading across plantation society under the cover of agricultural innovation. The official records from the investigation, sealed by court order for 75 years, tell a story that challenges everything historians thought they knew about antebellum Southern society. Evangeline's network had included not just individual plantation owners, but also representatives from agricultural colleges, medical schools, and scientific societies who had been actively encouraging research into what they euphemistically called biological resource optimization. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, his reputation restored by his son's discoveries, spent the remainder of his career documenting the medical evidence of systematic abuse he had observed, not just at Willowbrook, but at plantations throughout central Virginia. His private papers, donated to the Virginia Historical Society after his death, provide clinical documentation of injuries and deaths that suggest Evangeline's methods were being implemented far more widely than anyone had imagined. The roses of Willowbrook withered and died within weeks of Evangeline's death, their impossible beauty fading as rapidly as it had appeared. Investigators who examined the garden found soil so chemically contaminated that nothing would grow there for nearly a decade. The mysterious crimson substance that had stained so many victims' hands proved to be a concentrated mixture of human blood, toxic plant extracts, and industrial chemicals that Evangeline had been forcing her servants to handle without protection. Catherine Walsh survived her ordeal, but the psychological scars remained with her for life. She eventually married Thomas Hartwell and moved to Philadelphia, where she spent years working with organizations dedicated to protecting domestic workers from exploitation. Her detailed written account of the Willowbrook murders became the foundation for some of the earliest labor protection laws in Pennsylvania, though the specific circumstances that inspired these reforms were never made public. The plantation itself was abandoned immediately after the investigation concluded. Local folklore claimed that the property was cursed, but the real reason for its abandonment was more practical. The extensive contamination from Evangeline's experiments had made the land unsuitable for agriculture. The main house stood empty for 40 years before finally being demolished in 1890, its materials scattered and its history deliberately obscured. But the most disturbing aspect of the Willowbrook case was how successfully the wider conspiracy was suppressed. Despite overwhelming evidence of systematic murder and exploitation, only 3 individuals were ever prosecuted in connection with the network that Evangeline had documented. The prominent names in her correspondence, respected botanists, wealthy plantation owners, influential medical researchers, were quietly warned to cease their activities, but faced no formal charges. The cover-up was facilitated by the same social structures that had enabled the crimes in the first place. In a society where domestic workers had few legal protections and even fewer advocates, the systematic murder of young women could be dismissed as isolated incidents of workplace negligence. The scientific respectability that Evangeline had cultivated provided a veneer of legitimacy that made serious investigation almost impossible. Modern historians who have studied the sealed court records estimate that Evangeline's network may have been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of young women across the antebellum South. The true scope of these crimes will never be known, partly because many of the victims were immigrants or orphans whose disappearances were never officially investigated, and partly because the evidence was systematically destroyed by individuals with every incentive to hide their participation. Catherine's final journal entry, written 50 years after her escape from Willowbrook, provides perhaps the most fitting epitaph for the young women who died there. The roses that bloomed with such impossible beauty were not miracles of nature, but monuments to human evil disguised as scientific progress. Every perfect petal represented a life stolen. Every intoxicating fragrance carried the essence of innocence destroyed. Those who praised Evangeline's garden for its beauty were unknowingly celebrating the most calculated series of murders in our nation's history. The location of Willowbrook Plantation remains unmarked today, its coordinates deliberately obscured in official records to prevent any morbid fascination with the site. Local historians in Henrico County continue to receive occasional inquiries about the miraculous garden that once attracted visitors from across the country, but the full truth about those crimson roses and the terrible price paid for their beauty remains known only to a few scholars who have studied the sealed court documents. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this entire story is how easily it could happen again. The social conditions that enabled Evangeline's crimes, the vulnerability of domestic workers, the prestige of scientific research, the isolation of plantation life, and the deference shown to wealthy and educated individuals, exist in different forms throughout every era of American history. The rose garden of Willowbrook may have withered and died, but the capacity for evil disguised as progress remains as present today as it was in 1849. What do you think of this story? Do you believe that such systematic evil could really have been hidden so successfully? Leave your comments below and let me know what other dark mysteries from American history you'd like to see explored. If you enjoyed this tale of hidden horrors and want more stories that reveal the sinister secrets lurking beneath our nation's most respected institutions, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates the darker truths of our past. The shadows of history hold countless secrets, and together we can bring them into the light. See you in the next video, where we'll uncover another forgotten nightmare from America's hidden past.